We're going to make a wedge for this robot. So first things I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cube, stick it on the bottom, roughly centered, doesn't quite matter. And I'm going to make it stupidly big in every direction. And then I'm going to lower this down so that my wheels just barely touch it. And this is going to give you basically an idea of what the ground level is when all of your wheels are on the ground. Next, I'm going to take this and make it vinyl, and I'm going to set the thickness to the absolute minimum, and that's going to make the weight really light, so it gives you a better idea of what your robot's going to weigh with your wedge and everything on it. I'm almost going to make this a different color, just so I can very easily see anything that might be poking through. You can see there's some ground scraping stuff here. Now for the wedge itself, I'm going to take this cube here, I'm going to stick it on here, and this is going to act like a spacer to just kind of make sure that the wedge isn't directly touching the front of the robot. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. I should leave it right there. Then I'm going to take a wedge and put it on the front of this. And I'm going to stretch this out because I have in my mind, I have a design in mind. I have my wedge kind of come out here and protect my forks a little bit, and then maybe come along the side and wrap around a little. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cube, and I'm going to stick it on this wedge that I just placed here. I'm going to turn snapping off, and that'll match the angle of the wedge. Place it down, and then turn snapping back on. And now when I move it, it's going to snap to the wedge itself. You can kind of reposition this. There's a spot where right in the middle, it'll be perfectly flush with it. As you can see, it's like kind of exactly lined up right now, so that is perfect. And then I'm going to click on this and resize it. I'm going to make mine 0.1 thick. You can do 0.2 if you really want it to be durable. I'm doing this mostly for looks, so it's just going to be 0.1. Then you're going to resize this. So I want this to go all the way up here. And if I look from below, I can see that it's not exactly clipped. It's flush with the ground right now. This is basically going to be our starting point for the wedge. Everything's going to be built off of this. So I'm going to take a wedge and put it on the side of this. I'm going to angle it like this so that the slanted edge is towards the front of the bot. And I'm going to kind of resize this to match the cube that we already have. And there we go. Next, I'm going to take this and I'm going to angle this down. And you'll see that it's kind of clipping through my wheel. So before I move any further, I'm just going to resize this a little bit. Maybe bring it down like this. And that way I have some space for my wheel and some space to work with. I'm also going to take this and I'm going to resize the length to kind of roughly match the ground. You can also just rotate it a little bit more if you want. But I'm happy with this. It's not clipping through the ground, which is perfect. And next, what we got to do is turn off snapping and then perfectly line this up. So I'm going to move it over until it just barely intersects with this cube. And then from here, I'm going to move it up a little bit until it just perfectly lines up with the cube. Not quite perfect, but it's close enough. I don't think you'll notice at a distance, and I'm just trying to do this quickly right now. Take a cube. I'm going to stick this on here. And I'm going to resize this to be 0.1. Kind of match the length. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. I want to leave some space for the wheel, so I'm going to leave that there for now. And I'm going to build kind of like a guard for the top armor, because I don't want something to ride up the wedge and then hit the top armor. So I'm going to take another wedge, stick it here. And I'm going to maybe resize this down a little bit, like so. Slide that over. And then bring the sides of this way down. So it just lines up with this top edge of this cube perfectly. Whenever possible, I like to place things on things that are already rotated, if that makes any sense. So this cube is on this wedge, and that way if I decide later that I don't like the angle of this wedge, I can move this and everything attached to it will go with it. It just makes it a lot easier to kind of build on the fly and adjust as you need to. So I'm pretty happy with that. Let's keep adding to the guard here. So I'm going to turn off snapping again, and that's going to match the angle of this wedge. I'm going to place it roughly in the middle. I'm going to turn snapping back on, and then when I move it, it's going to snap perfectly to the center. Then I'm going to rotate this up like so, maybe a little bit more. There we go. And I'm going to size this up. And just like that, we kind of have a little guard that protects the top armor, but I'm also going to line this up from below and kind of slide this over. Can be a little hard to see sometimes, but I'll do my best. And that is good enough for me. I want this to kind of slope down and meet with the rest of the wedge so it looks a little bit more natural. So I'm going to take this, place it on the side, again snapping on. And I'm going to resize this until it just kind of suits the side there. There we go. And bring this out a little bit. And since this is kind of angled backwards compared to the guard, I'm going to rotate this a little bit, like so. Find something that I'm roughly happy with. Turn off snapping, and again, line this up. Make it nice and seamless. And there we go. I also want this to kind of go up the side a tiny bit, so I'm gonna take a cube, actually. Slam it on there. Resize this a little bit. Have this come up the side. And then just to round it all out, I'm going to stick a wedge on here. And just kind of smooth that off. And just for good measure, let's just add one here as well. And match this up. There we go. That was nice and quick. I'm going to add a fillet as well, just to round this out, make it look a little bit better. This is actually a pre-made part now. You don't need to use a custom shape. This is just a very old bot that I'm working on, so I happen to just use the custom shape version for this. I think 0.2 will do nicely. Slide that in there, line it up, and match the material and the color. And there we go. So I'm pretty happy with the way this wedge looks, but if you look at the front, you'll notice that it's not really scraping the ground. So this is not gonna really help unless you're going up against a horizontal that's very high off the ground. So if we do want to make this ground scraping, it's actually pretty easy to do. You're gonna take another wedge and slap it on the front, and you want the slanted end to be down, facing the ground, and the flat end to be kind of up, lining up with the rest of the cube. So if you look at this, it's pretty much just a flat surface all the way down. And the reason why we have this big brown thing is because now we can go below and we can resize this until it just barely touches. I turn snapping off for this usually, so I'm going to turn it off here and just ever so slightly resize it until you can see it just barely touches the brown. And that basically is a good sign that it's scraping along the ground. It's okay if it clips through a little bit. Your wheels will still touch the ground as they turn, but don't do it too much, otherwise you're going to kind of high center the front of your bot, and it's only going to move because of the back wheels. Basically, the front wheels are going to do nothing. I'm going to copy this, and again, with snapping off, I'm going to place it on the side of this big wedge piece that we have here. And then I'm going to turn snapping back on. Got to find the middle. I think that's it right there. And again, rotate that so it kind of lines up. It looks like it's lined up nicely. And then I'm gonna stretch this out to kind of go the entire length of this. I'm thinking around here, I'm gonna let this kind of come off the ground. I don't want this part to be scraping. I only want the front of the bot to scrape. This part gets a little bit tricky, so this is now kind of covering the entire length of that side. But if I go under the ground here and I see this and I try to, resize this so it just barely clips through, you'll run into a problem where this part is a little bit lower than this part. And that's because this wedge isn't exactly flush with the ground. As it goes out, it kind of raises up a little bit. So to fix that, I'm going to rotate this on this axis here, and you'll see it kind of removes that. But if I go underground, I can rotate this until it's roughly even all across, and you can kind of resize it to make it a little bit easier to tell. So you can see here, it's just barely clipping through all across now, and that's great. That's what we want. And now I'm just going to move this up and line this up with the edge here so that there's no gap anywhere along this wedge. This is kind of messed up this side here though, so I'm going to fix this, make it a little bit smaller. We'll actually move it over a little bit. And don't worry too much about this gap just yet. We'll come back and fix that. So if I go back under, now I can just resize this so that it barely clips as well. Don't be afraid to get right up close. You'll want to be precise with this part. And there we go. So far so good, but now you have this ugly little gap right here. And this is kind of hard to fix, but I found an easy way. So go to custom shapes, create a new custom shape, and I'm gonna just make something roughly like this. It's kind of a big V shape. That's your first layer. For the second layer, bring it all the way over to the other side. Bring this one so it's 2 ticks away. And then kind of make a diamond shape with the other points. I'm gonna raise this up to 0.5. And then on the left side here, set the scale factor to 0.1. This just makes it a whole lot easier to work with. Doesn't really matter what collision you do, they're pretty much all the same for this. I usually call this corner, but call it whatever you want. And now I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna place it on the side of the support that we built at the beginning. It just makes it a little bit easier to position. I'm gonna lower this down to ground level and rotate this so it's flush with the ground. And the important thing here is that you'll have this kind of flat side at the very top. Make sure that is pointing up. You don't want that to be down and level with the ground. And we're going to rotate this. I'm going to go ahead and match the material. I'm going to leave it a different color though, just because it makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. So now what we want to do basically is we want to match this seam right here along our wedge with this seam on this corner piece. And it's very precise, so you probably want to have snapping off for most of this, but I'm going to roughly position it. You can see that is now lined up. The next thing we want to do is I'm going to make this a little bit smaller because it's a bit too big. And I'm going to lower this down. So the next thing we want from this is we want to line up the seam so it matches kind of vertically as well. So first thing is that over. Kind of hard to see with this pointer in the way, but you can see this kind of roughly lines up. And then I'm going to raise this up till it lines up here. That kind of matches. And then last but not least, take the last axis and slide that down until it just barely kind of fills that gap. I just make it match. And boom, you're done. That's really all there is to it. You can kind of take the same steps and same techniques and kind of mix and match to do whatever you want. Feel free to get creative with it. Yeah. I don't know how to end a video.